The birthday cake sat untouched on the table. 75 candles slowly melting into colorful pools of wax. Around me, the Riverside Community Center fell silent as Derek Thompson stood at the microphone, his voice carrying across the room like poison through clear water. "I think it's time we all acknowledged the elephant in the room," he announced to my family and friends gathered for what was supposed to be my celebration. "Harry's been showing signs of dementia lately, and frankly, we're all concerned about his ability to make sound decisions anymore." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The words hit me like a physical blow. In front of 43 people who had known me for decades, my son-in-law was publicly declaring me mentally incompetent. I watched as confused murmurs rippled through the crowd, saw the horror on my daughter Linda's face, felt the weight of humiliation settle on my shoulders like a lead blanket. Derek continued speaking, his tone measured and professional, explaining how concerned he and Linda were about my recent episodes and confused behavior. I had built Miller's hardware store from nothing 42 years ago, turning a small investment into the cornerstone business of downtown Riverside. I had served on the city council for 12 years, been president of the Chamber of Commerce, and helped raise over $200,000 for the new children's hospital wing. My late wife Rose and I had been married for 47 years before cancer took her 8 years ago, and together we had raised Linda to be a compassionate, intelligent woman who now worked as a head nurse at Riverside General Hospital. But none of that mattered as Derek painted me as a confused old man who could no longer be trusted with his own affairs. The irony burned in my chest as I realized this performance was taking place in the very community center that bore a plaque thanking me for my contributions to its construction fund 15 years earlier. The trouble had started 3 months ago, when Derek moved into my house on Maple Street. Linda had been living in a cramped apartment across town while saving for a down payment on their own place, and I had suggested they move in temporarily to help with their finances. My 4-bedroom house felt empty since Rose passed away, and I welcomed the company. Linda had been hesitant, but Derek jumped at the opportunity, immediately calculating the money they would save on rent and utilities. What I hadn't anticipated was how quickly Derek would begin treating my home like his personal headquarters. Within 2 weeks, he had taken over my home office for his marketing work, claiming he needed the space for important client calls. My workshop in the garage became his storage area for expensive cycling equipment and photography gear. The living room was rearranged to accommodate his massive television and gaming setup, pushing Rose's antique furniture into corners like unwanted memories. When I gently suggested we find a balance that worked for everyone, Derek launched into lectures about modern living arrangements and the importance of adapting to change. He spoke to me like I was a child who needed education about how the world worked, his tone always patient but condescending, as if my 7.5 decades of life experience meant nothing compared to his marketing degree and corporate ambitions. The breaking point came 6 weeks ago, when I discovered Derek had been intercepting my mail. Important documents about my investments, medical appointments, and business correspondence were stacked on his desk, opened and sorted according to his own system. When I confronted him about this violation of my privacy, he explained it as helping me stay organized, claiming he was worried about my ability to manage important paperwork effectively. That evening, Linda sat me down for what she called a family meeting. Derek had convinced her that I was showing signs of cognitive decline, pointing to instances where I had forgotten where I placed my reading glasses, or taking longer than usual to remember someone's name. Normal occurrences for any 75-year-old became evidence of mental deterioration in Derek's carefully constructed narrative. Linda's eyes filled with tears as she suggested I consider seeing a doctor for a cognitive assessment. The concern in her voice was genuine, and I realized Derek had managed to weaponize her love for me against both of us. He sat beside her, nodding sympathetically, while his eyes held a coldness that made my stomach turn. I had agreed to the medical evaluation to put Linda's mind at ease, knowing full well there was nothing wrong with my mental faculties. Dr. Patricia Wells, who had been my physician for 22 years, conducted a thorough examination, including cognitive tests, brain scans, and neurological assessments. The results were unambiguous. I was in excellent mental health with no signs of dementia, Alzheimer's, or any other cognitive impairment. When I brought the clean bill of health home, Derek's reaction was telling. Instead of relief or happiness, he questioned the thoroughness of the tests and suggested seeking a second opinion from a specialist he knew. He planted seeds of doubt about Dr. Wells' competence and implied that small-town doctors might miss subtle signs that required more sophisticated evaluation. But Derek had made a crucial miscalculation. In his eagerness to establish his narrative about my declining mental state, he had chosen my 75th birthday party as the stage for his performance. What he didn't understand was that this gathering represented 43 witnesses to my actual character and capabilities. These weren't strangers who might believe his carefully crafted story. These were people who had known me for decades, who had worked alongside me, who had seen me navigate complex business decisions and community challenges with clarity and wisdom. Frank Rodriguez, my neighbor for 28 years, stood up from his table near the back of the room. Frank had retired from his position as high school principal 5 years ago, and his voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to dealing with difficult situations. "Derek," he said firmly, "I've known Harry Mitchell since before you were born, and there's nothing wrong with his mind. What you're doing here is disgraceful." The room's energy shifted as other voices joined in. Betty Chen, who lived across the street, reminded everyone that I had helped her navigate complex insurance claims just last month when her basement flooded. Bob Mitchell, my younger brother, pointed out that I had just completed my taxes independently and balanced my investment portfolio without assistance. Margaret Sullivan, who had worked with Rose at the hospital for 20 years, stood to defend my mental acuity and question Derek's motives. Derek tried to maintain control of the narrative, explaining that family members often notice changes before outsiders do, that cognitive decline could be subtle and progressive. But his audience was no longer receptive. These people had watched Derek arrive in our community 18 months ago with his expensive car and designer clothes, talking about transforming Riverside's outdated business practices and bringing metropolitan sophistication to our provincial town. Linda finally found her voice, her face pale as she processed what was happening. "Derek, this is completely inappropriate," she said, her voice trembling with the mixture of anger and embarrassment. "This is Dad's birthday celebration, and you're making accusations without any medical basis." Derek's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something calculating and cold beneath his concerned son-in-law facade. "Linda, we discussed this," he said, his tone sharp enough to cut through the room's tension. "Your father needs professional care, and someone has to make the difficult decisions when family members are too emotionally involved to see clearly."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
That was when I understood the full scope of Derek's plan. This wasn't just about humiliating me or establishing dominance in my own home. This was about gaining legal control over my affairs, my property, and my finances. By publicly establishing a narrative of mental incompetence, Derek was laying groundwork for guardianship proceedings that would put him in charge of my life, while positioning himself as the reluctant hero, making tough choices for everyone's benefit. I looked around the room at the faces of people who had known me through decades of challenges and triumphs. These were the witnesses to my character, the people who understood that Harold Mitchell might be 75 years old, but he was far from finished. In that moment, watching Derek's performance, I felt something crystallize inside me that had been building for months. This man had invaded my home, manipulated my daughter, and now was attempting to destroy my reputation in front of my community. The birthday candles continued melting on my untouched cake as I made a decision that would change everything. Derek Thompson had chosen the wrong old man to underestimate, and tomorrow he was going to learn exactly what happened when you tried to destroy someone who had spent 7 decades building relationships, reputation, and respect in a town where character still mattered. The party ended in an uncomfortable silence as guests made their excuses and departed early, leaving behind half-eaten food and the wreckage of what should have been a joyful celebration. But as I watched Derek's confident smile falter when he realized his performance hadn't achieved its intended effect, I felt the first stirring of something I hadn't experienced in months. Not anger exactly, but purpose. Clear, focused, and absolutely determined purpose. The morning after my birthday disaster arrived gray and drizzling, matching my mood as I sat in my kitchen with cold coffee and yesterday's humiliation replaying in my mind. Linda had left early for her shift at the hospital without saying goodbye, her eyes red from crying. Derek was nowhere to be seen, probably holed up in what used to be my office, making his important phone calls and pretending nothing had happened. I was staring out at my rain-soaked garden when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Frank Rodriguez holding a manila envelope, his expression serious. When I opened the door, he stepped inside and handed me the package without ceremony. "Harry, you need to see this," he said, shaking droplets from his jacket. "Betty found it this morning when she was taking out her trash. Someone went through your garbage last night and left these papers scattered on the ground." Inside the envelope were photocopies of my personal documents, bank statements, investment portfolios, insurance policies, medical records from Dr. Wells, and most disturbing of all, a printed email exchange between Derek and someone named Marcus Hoffman from Hoffman Legal Services. The subject line read, "Guardianship Consultation, Harold Mitchell Case." My hands trembled as I read Derek's detailed description of my supposed mental decline. He had documented every instance where I misplaced my keys, every moment I paused to remember a name, every normal sign of aging, and reframed it as evidence of cognitive impairment. Worse, he had fabricated incidents that never happened, claiming I had gotten lost driving to the grocery store and that I had forgotten to turn off the stove multiple times. The lawyer's response was chilling in its clinical efficiency. Marcus Hoffman outlined the legal steps required to establish guardianship, including the need for public documentation of incompetence, medical evaluations from multiple doctors, and testimony from concerned family members. The fees for this service would be substantial, but Hoffman assured Derek that once guardianship was established, all costs could be recovered from my estate. Frank watched my face as I processed the implications. "They're trying to steal everything you've worked for," he said quietly. "That performance last night wasn't just cruelty, Harry. It was evidence gathering." I sank into my kitchen chair, feeling older than my 75 years. Derek had been living in my house for 3 months, systematically building a case against my mental competence while positioning himself as my concerned caretaker. Every conversation where he corrected my memory, every instance where he took over a task claiming I might forget, every gentle suggestion that I was becoming forgetful had been carefully orchestrated. "There's more," Frank continued, pulling out his phone. "Betty recorded Derek's speech last night. She was filming for her granddaughter who couldn't make it to the party, but she caught the whole thing. Want to hear something interesting?" He played the recording.
and I listened to Derek's voice again. But this time, Frank had isolated certain phrases. Derek's tone was too polished, too rehearsed. This wasn't spontaneous concern about my well-being. This was a prepared presentation designed to establish a legal record of my incompetence in front of multiple witnesses. "He practiced this," I said, understanding flooding through me. "The whole speech was scripted." Frank nodded grimly. "And look at the timing. Yesterday was Saturday, so most people couldn't immediately fact-check anything he said. By Monday morning, when folks start talking, the story will have had time to spread and solidify." That's when I remembered something that made my blood run cold. 3 weeks ago, Derek had insisted on driving me to my doctor's appointment with Dr. Wells. At the time, I had appreciated the gesture, thinking he was trying to be helpful. But now I realized he had been in the waiting room when I received my cognitive assessment results. He knew I had passed every test with flying colors, knew there was no medical basis for his claims about my mental state. Derek had deliberately chosen to ignore scientific evidence in favor of his fabricated narrative. This wasn't misguided concern about my well-being. This was calculated fraud designed to gain control of my assets while positioning himself as the reluctant hero making difficult decisions for the family. My phone rang, startling both Frank and me. Bob Mitchell's name appeared on the screen, and I answered to hear my brother's angry voice crackling through the speaker. "Harry, I've been up all night thinking about what happened yesterday, and I'm madder than hell," Bob said without preamble. "I called Linda this morning to check on you, and you know what she told me? She said Derek has been concerned about your mental state for months, and that maybe it's time to consider having someone else help manage your affairs." The betrayal hit me like a punch to the stomach. My own daughter, the child I had raised to be strong and independent, was being manipulated into supporting Derek's scheme. Linda's genuine concern for my well-being was being weaponized against both of us. "Bob, I need you to do something for me," I said, making a decision that would change everything. "I need you to call Margaret Sullivan and ask her to meet me for lunch today. Tell her it's important." Margaret Sullivan had been Rose's closest friend and had worked as head administrator at Riverside General Hospital for 35 years before retiring. More importantly, she served on the boards of 3 different organizations in town and maintained connections throughout the medical and legal communities. If anyone could help me understand the full scope of what Derek was attempting, it would be Margaret. After Frank left, I spent the morning going through every document in my house, looking for anything Derek might have copied or photographed. In my home office, now dominated by his computer equipment and marketing materials, I found a small scanner hidden behind a stack of his client folders. The device was warm to the touch, indicating recent use. I checked the scanner's memory and discovered dozens of files containing images of my personal documents. Bank statements, tax returns, insurance policies, investment records, even personal letters from Rose that I kept in my desk drawer. Derek had been systematically documenting my financial situation while living under my roof, building a comprehensive picture of my assets for his guardianship attorney. The violation felt worse than physical theft. This man had invaded my home, exploited my hospitality, manipulated my daughter, and now was attempting to steal my autonomy and independence. But as I stared at the evidence of his betrayal, I felt something shift inside me that I hadn't experienced since Rose's death. Not despair or resignation, but cold, focused determination. Margaret arrived for lunch at Riverside Cafe looking elegant as always, her silver hair perfectly styled and her intelligent eyes sharp with concern. I had known Margaret for over 20 years, and she had never been one to waste time on pleasantries when serious matters needed discussion. "Harry, Frank told me some disturbing things about your birthday party," she said, settling into the booth across from me. "But I suspect there's more to this story than public humiliation." I showed her the photocopied documents and explained Derek's systematic campaign to establish my incompetence. Margaret listened without interruption, her expression growing darker with each detail. When I finished, She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the email correspondence between Derek and his attorney. "This is elder abuse," she said finally, her voice tight with anger. "Financial elder abuse, specifically. Derek is attempting to gain control of your assets through fraudulent guardianship proceedings. The fact that he's documented this conspiracy in writing makes it a serious criminal matter." Margaret pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts. "I'm calling Dr. Patricia Wells right now. She needs to know that someone is attempting to use falsified medical claims to establish guardianship. Patricia takes these matters very seriously, and she has connections with the state attorney general's office." But I held up my hand to stop her. "Margaret, I appreciate your help, but I don't want to involve authorities just yet. Derek has been very careful to operate within legal boundaries, and proving criminal intent might be difficult. I need to handle this differently." Margaret studied my face with the same intensity she had once used to evaluate hospital budgets and staff performance. "What are you thinking, Harry?" I leaned forward, keeping my voice low despite the cafe's relative privacy. "Derek works in marketing, which means his career depends entirely on reputation and client relationships. He's built his professional identity around trust, reliability, and ethical business practices. What would happen to that career if his clients discovered he was attempting to defraud a 75-year-old man?" Understanding dawned in Margaret's eyes. "You want to expose him professionally rather than legally. Derek chose to make this public when he humiliated me in front of my community. He used my reputation as a weapon against me. I think it's time he learned what it feels like when someone uses his reputation against him." Margaret smiled for the first time since arriving, and it was not a pleasant expression. "Harry Mitchell, you devious old fox. What do you need from me?" "Information," I said simply. "Derek works at Thompson & Associates Marketing. I need to know who his clients are, what projects he's working on, and most importantly, how his professional reputation might be affected if certain facts about his personal conduct became known to the right people." Margaret was already making notes on her napkin. "Thompson & Associates handles marketing for several major businesses in the region, including some I have connections with through my board positions. Give me 24 hours and I'll have everything you need to know about Derek Thompson's professional vulnerabilities." As we prepared to leave the cafe, Margaret touched my arm gently.
"Harry, are you absolutely certain you want to do this? Once you start down this path, there might not be a way back to any kind of family relationship with Derek." I thought about Linda, about the confusion and pain in her eyes as she watched her husband publicly humiliate her father. I thought about Rose, about what she would want me to do when faced with someone who threatened everything we had built together. Most of all, I thought about the letter Derek had written to his attorney, describing me as an easy target for financial exploitation. "Margaret," I said quietly, "Derek destroyed any possibility of family relationship when he decided to treat me like a mark in a confidence game. Tomorrow, he's going to learn that this particular mark has teeth." The rain had stopped by the time I drove home, and weak afternoon sunlight was breaking through the clouds. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed Derek's expensive sedan was gone. Through the kitchen window, I could see Linda moving around inside, probably preparing dinner after her hospital shift. I sat in my car for a moment, looking at my house and thinking about the conversation I was about to have with my daughter. Tonight, I would show Linda the evidence of Derek's betrayal and give her a chance to choose between her father and her husband. But regardless of her decision, tomorrow Derek Thompson was going to discover that Harold Mitchell was far from the helpless old man he had imagined. Linda was standing at the kitchen counter when I walked through the back door. Her nurse's scrubs wrinkled from a long shift, her movements mechanical as she chopped vegetables for what looked like dinner preparation. She glanced up when I entered, and I saw the weight of yesterday's events in the dark circles under her eyes and the way her shoulders sagged with exhaustion. "Dad, we need to talk," she said without looking at me, her knife continuing its steady rhythm against the cutting board. "Derek feels terrible about last night. He says he didn't mean for it to come out the way it did, but he's genuinely worried about you." I set the manila envelope containing Derek's conspiracy documents on the kitchen table and pulled out a chair.
Linda, before you say anything else, I need you to look at something. Then you can decide for yourself what Derek's real intentions are. She wiped her hands on a dish towel and reluctantly sat across from me, her expression guarded. When I spread the photocopied documents across the table, her face went through a series of changes: confusion, recognition, and finally horror as she understood what she was looking at. "These are your bank statements," she whispered, picking up one of the papers with trembling fingers. "And your medical records. Dad, where did you get these?" "Someone went through our garbage last night and scattered these copies on the ground. Frank found them this morning." I watched her face carefully as she read Derek's email exchange with the guardianship attorney. "Linda, your husband has been planning to have me declared mentally incompetent so he can control my finances. Yesterday's performance wasn't concern about my well-being. It was evidence gathering for a legal case." Linda stared at the documents for a long moment, her breathing shallow and rapid. When she finally looked up, tears were streaming down her cheeks. "This can't be right. Derek loves you. He's always talking about how much he respects you, how grateful he is that you let us live here." "Read the email again," I said gently. "Read what he wrote about me to that lawyer." She picked up the printed correspondence and read aloud in a shaking voice. "Subject is isolated, recently widowed, significant assets with minimal family oversight. Daughter works long hospital shifts and trusts my judgment regarding her father's condition. Expect minimal resistance to guardianship proceedings once public documentation of incompetence is established." The paper fluttered from her hands as she covered her face, sobbing with the kind of broken sound that comes from discovering everything you believed was a lie. I reached across the table and took her hand, feeling how cold her fingers were despite the warm kitchen. "Linda, honey, this isn't your fault," I said. "Derek is very good at manipulation. He's been working on both of us for months." "I believed him," she choked out. "When he said you were getting forgetful, when he pointed out little things that seemed concerning, I actually believed him. I was ready to support having you evaluated for guardianship because I thought it was what you needed." I squeezed her hand tighter. "What did Derek tell you about my medical evaluation with Dr. Wells?" Linda wiped her eyes with her free hand. "He said the tests were inconclusive, that small-town doctors might miss early signs of cognitive decline. He wanted you to see a specialist in Portland, someone who could do more comprehensive testing." "Dr. Wells gave me a clean bill of health, Linda. Perfect cognitive function, no signs of dementia or any other mental impairment. Derek knew that, and he chose to lie to you about the results." The kitchen fell silent, except for the sound of Linda's crying and the steady tick of the wall clock that had belonged to her mother. I gave her time to process what she had learned, watching as grief and anger warred across her face. "He's been living in our house for 3 months, she finally said, her voice thick with emotion. "Eating your food, using your utilities, sleeping in Mom's old sewing room, and the whole time he was planning to steal everything from you." "Not just planning," I said, showing her the scanner I had found in my office. "He's been systematically copying all my financial documents, bank statements, investment records, insurance policies, even personal letters from your mother." Linda's expressions shifted from grief to something harder and more determined. She stood abruptly and walked to the window that overlooked the driveway, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Where is he now?" she asked. "I don't know. His car was gone when I got home." She turned back to face me, and I saw something in her expression that reminded me of Rose when she was fighting the hospital administration over patient care issues. Linda had inherited her mother's steel spine, and Derek had made the mistake of targeting both the people she loved most. "Dad, what are we going to do about this?" Before I could answer, we heard Derek's car pulling into the driveway. Linda quickly gathered up the scattered documents and handed them to me. "Put these away. I don't want him to know we've seen them yet." Through the window, we watched Derek emerge from his sedan carrying a bouquet of expensive flowers and what looked like a bottle of wine. His expression was perfectly composed, the concerned son-in-law returning home after a difficult day of worrying about his wife's father. "Can you act normal around him?" I asked Linda quietly. "I'm a nurse, Dad. I deal with difficult people every day." Her voice was steady now, professional. "But I need to know what your plan is." Derek's footsteps approached the back door, and I quickly slipped the documents into a kitchen drawer. "Trust me, honey. By tomorrow night, Derek Thompson is going to wish he had never heard the name Mitchell." Derek entered the kitchen with his trademark smile, the one that had charmed Linda into marrying him and had convinced me to welcome him into my home. He set the flowers on the counter and kissed Linda's cheek, the picture of a devoted husband trying to make amends after a difficult situation. "Linda, sweetheart, I brought your favorites," he said, arranging the flowers in a vase with practiced efficiency. "And Harry, I got that wine you liked from our anniversary dinner last month. I thought we could talk about everything that happened yesterday." I watched him perform his role as the caring family member, noting how smoothly he transitioned into concerned son-in-law mode. This was a man who had built his career on reading people and crafting the right message for any audience. Unfortunately for Derek, he had seriously misjudged his current audience.
"That's thoughtful of you, Derek," I said, accepting the wine bottle and noting its expensive label. "I think we do need to clear the air about a few things." Derek pulled out a chair and sat down with the confident posture of someone who believed he controlled the conversation. "Harry, I owe you an apology for last night. I let my concern for your well-being overcome my judgment about the appropriate time and place to discuss these issues. But I hope you understand that everything I said came from a place of love and worry about your safety." Linda stood at the counter with her back to us, ostensibly arranging the flowers, but I could see the tension in her shoulders as she listened to her husband lie with practiced sincerity. "Derek, I've been thinking about what you said," I replied carefully. "About my memory issues and the concerns you've been having. Maybe you're right. Maybe I should consider getting some help managing my affairs." Derek's eyes lit up with triumph, though he tried to hide it behind an expression of relieved concern. "Harry, I'm so glad you're open to discussing this. Linda and I have been so worried, but we didn't want to push you into anything you weren't ready for." "What exactly did you have in mind?" I asked, curious to see how far Derek would push his advantage. "Well, there are legal arrangements that could help ensure your finances and medical decisions are handled appropriately," Derek said, leaning forward with the enthusiasm of someone who thought he was winning. "Guardianship proceedings, for instance, that would allow someone you trust to make important decisions when you're having difficulty with complex matters." Linda turned from the counter, her face carefully neutral. "And who would serve as guardian in this arrangement?" Derek spread his hands in a gesture of modest reluctance. "Obviously, it would need to be someone close to the family, someone who understands Harry's needs and has his best interests at heart. I'd be willing to take on that responsibility, despite the burden it would represent." The sheer audacity of it took my breath away. Derek was sitting in my kitchen, eating food I had purchased, surrounded by furniture I had bought with money I had earned through 42 years of hard work, proposing that I voluntarily surrender control of my life to him. "That's very generous of you," I said, matching his tone of sincere concern. "But wouldn't that be a lot of responsibility for someone with a demanding career? I wouldn't want to interfere with your professional obligations." Derek's expression flickered for just a moment, and I caught a glimpse of calculation behind his concerned facade. "My career is certainly important, but family comes first. I'm sure my clients would understand if I needed to adjust my schedule to properly care for Harry's needs." Linda sat down at the table, her hands folded in her lap. "Derek, exactly when did you first start noticing these memory issues with Dad?" "It's been gradual," Derek said, settling into what was clearly a rehearsed explanation. little things at first, misplacing items, repeating stories, having trouble following complex conversations. But over the past few weeks, it's become more pronounced. "Can you give me specific examples?" Linda pressed, her nurse's training evident in her systematic approach to gathering information. Derek launched into a detailed recounting of supposed incidents, most of which I recognized as either complete fabrications or gross distortions of normal forgetfulness. He described me getting lost on familiar routes, forgetting to pay bills, leaving appliances running, and displaying confusion about current events. As I listened to Derek paint this picture of my decline, I felt a cold anger settle in my chest. This man had studied me like a predator studies prey, cataloging every normal human moment of distraction or forgetfulness and weaponizing it against my independence and dignity. "Those are serious concerns," Linda said, when Derek finished his presentation. "Have you discussed any of this with Dad's doctor?" "I've been thinking we should seek a second opinion," Derek said smoothly. "Someone with more experience in geriatric cognitive assessment. I actually know of a specialist in Portland who might be able to provide a more comprehensive evaluation." Linda nodded thoughtfully. "That sounds reasonable. What's the specialist's name?" Derek hesitated for just a fraction of a second, and I realized he was improvising. The specialist probably didn't exist, or was someone he planned to research later. "Dr. Marcus Hoffman. He comes highly recommended for these types of evaluations." Linda's expression didn't change, but I caught the sharp look she shot in my direction. Marcus Hoffman was the name of Derek's guardianship attorney, not a medical specialist. Derek had just made a crucial mistake, revealing the depth of his deception while trying to maintain his helpful family member charade. "Well," I said, standing up from the table, "this has been a very enlightening conversation. Derek, I appreciate your concern and your willingness to help manage this situation. Linda, thank you for being so supportive during this difficult time." Derek smiled with satisfaction, clearly believing he had successfully manipulated us both into compliance with his plans. "Harry, I'm just glad we can work together as a family to make sure you get the care you need." As Derek and Linda began preparing dinner, chatting about their respective days with artificial normalcy, I excused myself and walked upstairs to my bedroom. Tomorrow would bring the culmination of everything I had been planning, but tonight I needed to make one final phone call to ensure Derek Thompson's professional destruction would be complete and irreversible. The phone rang twice before Margaret Sullivan answered, her voice crisp with anticipation. "Harry, please tell me you have good news?" "Better than good, Margaret," I said, looking out my bedroom window at Derek's expensive car in my driveway. Derek just volunteered to be my guardian and recommended his own attorney as a medical specialist. He's handed me everything I need to destroy him. Margaret Sullivan arrived at my house at precisely 8 o'clock Tuesday morning, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing the same determined expression she had worn when restructuring hospital departments during her administrative career. Linda had already left for her early shift at the hospital, and Derek was upstairs getting ready for work, unaware that his entire professional world was about to collapse around him. "Harry, you're going to love this," Margaret said, settling into my kitchen chair and opening her portfolio with the satisfaction of someone who had spent decades mastering the art of thorough research. "Derek Thompson has made some very interesting enemies during his 18 months at Thompson & Associates Marketing." She spread several documents across my kitchen table, each one representing a different aspect of Derek's professional vulnerabilities. The first was a client list showing the companies that relied on Thompson & Associates for their marketing campaigns: Riverside Medical Supply, Pacific Northwest Lumber, Columbia River Restaurants, and most importantly, Cascade Financial Group, which managed investment portfolios for most of the region's wealthy families. "Derek's primary client is Cascade Financial," Margaret explained, pointing to a highlighted section of the client agreement. "He manages their entire social media presence and handles all their community outreach programs. Their contract specifically includes morality clauses about maintaining public trust and ethical standards."
The second document was even more interesting. Margaret had obtained copies of Derek's employee handbook and professional code of conduct from Thompson and Associates. The marketing firm prided itself on integrity and community trust, requiring all employees to sign detailed agreements about maintaining professional standards both at work and in their personal lives. "Look at Section 12, Margaret said with obvious satisfaction. "Any employee engaged in fraudulent behavior, elder abuse, or criminal conspiracy faces immediate termination and forfeiture of all commissions and benefits."
Derek's about to lose approximately $60,000 in pending commissions if his employer discovers what he's been doing. But Margaret's most devastating research involved Derek's personal professional relationships within the Riverside business community. She had discovered that Derek had been positioning himself as an expert in elder care marketing, specifically targeting businesses that served older adults. He had written articles for the local business journal about building trust with senior citizens, and had even given presentations about ethical marketing to older demographics. "The hypocrisy is breathtaking," Margaret said, showing me copies of Derek's published articles. 6 months ago, he wrote a piece called "Building Authentic Relationships with Senior Clients" for the Riverside Business Review. He positioned himself as an advocate for elder rights and ethical business practices. Margaret pulled out her phone and showed me a series of screenshots from Derek's professional social media accounts. His LinkedIn profile described him as passionate about serving the senior community, and his company bio emphasized his commitment to helping older adults navigate complex financial and healthcare decisions. Derek has built his entire professional brand around trustworthiness and elder advocacy, Margaret continued. His clients hired him specifically because they believed he understood how to ethically serve older adults. When they discover he's been attempting to defraud a 75-year-old man, his career won't just be damaged, it will be obliterated. I studied the documents Margaret had gathered, impressed by the thoroughness of her research. How do we get this information to the right people without it looking like a personal vendetta? Margaret smiled with the kind of satisfaction that came from years of strategic planning. "We don't have to do anything directly. We simply provide the facts to people who have a professional obligation to act on them." She explained her plan with the precision of a military strategist. First, she would contact Dr. Patricia Wells and provide her with copies of Derek's correspondence with the guardianship attorney. Dr. Wells was legally required to report suspected elder abuse to state authorities, which would trigger an official investigation. Second, Margaret would reach out to her contacts at Cascade Financial Group and share Derek's published articles alongside evidence of his actual behavior toward me. As a financial services company serving elderly clients, Cascade would be legally liable if they continued employing someone engaged in elder fraud. Third, she would submit Derek's story to the Riverside Business Review as a cautionary tale about professional ethics. The same publication that had featured his articles about elder advocacy would now expose him as exactly the kind of predator he had claimed to protect seniors against. "The beauty of this approach," Margaret explained, "is that we're not seeking revenge. We're simply ensuring that relevant professional authorities have access to factual information about Derek's conduct. They'll draw their own conclusions about whether someone engaged in elder fraud should be trusted with marketing campaigns targeting senior citizens." As Margaret organized her documents, Derek's footsteps could be heard on the stairs. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, wearing his expensive suit and carrying his leather briefcase, the picture of professional success. His smile faltered slightly when he saw Margaret sitting at my kitchen table, but he quickly recovered his composure. "Mrs. Sullivan, what a pleasant surprise," Derek said, extending his hand with practiced charm. "I hope Harry's feeling better today after our conversation last night."
Margaret shook his hand with cool politeness. "Actually, Derek, I'm here on business. Harry and I were just discussing some community outreach programs that might benefit from professional marketing expertise." Derek's eyes lit up with interest, clearly scenting a potential business opportunity.
"I'd be happy to discuss how Thompson and Associates might be able to help with any community initiatives." "How thoughtful," Margaret replied smoothly. "Particularly given your expertise in elder care marketing. I read your article in the Business Review about building authentic relationships with senior clients. Very insightful work." Derek preened at the compliment, completely unaware that Margaret was documenting his reaction for future reference. "Elder advocacy is something I'm passionate about. Too many people take advantage of seniors who might be vulnerable or isolated." The irony of Derek lecturing about elder abuse while sitting in the kitchen of the elderly man he was attempting to defraud was almost too much to bear. I watched Margaret's face remain perfectly neutral as she absorbed Derek's performance. "That's exactly the kind of ethical perspective we need," Margaret said. "Would you be available for a meeting this afternoon to discuss some potential projects? I have several board positions that might benefit from your services." Derek checked his phone calendar eagerly. "I have a client presentation at 2, but I could meet around 4 o'clock if that works for you." "Perfect," Margaret said, making a note in her portfolio. "Let's meet at the Cascade Financial offices downtown. I'll arrange for some of their senior staff to join us." Derek's face flushed with excitement at the prospect of meeting with Cascade Financial's leadership team. He clearly viewed this as a major business opportunity, a chance to expand his client base and enhance his professional reputation. After Derek left for work, Margaret and I sat in my kitchen planning the final details of his professional destruction. She had already contacted Dr. Wells, who was preparing to file mandatory elder abuse reports with state authorities. The investigation would be discreet but thorough, focusing on Derek's fraudulent guardianship conspiracy. "The meeting this afternoon will be interesting," Margaret said with grim satisfaction. "Cascade Financial's senior partners include 2 retired judges and a former district attorney. They take elder fraud very seriously, particularly when it involves someone they've been considering for expanded marketing contracts." I found myself feeling almost sorry for Derek as I imagined him walking into that conference room, expecting to discuss new business opportunities, only to discover that his professional reputation was being systematically dismantled by people who had access to his own written confession of fraudulent intent. "Margaret, are you certain this won't reflect poorly on Linda?" I asked. "She's going to have to live with the consequences of being married to someone who's been exposed as an elder abuse perpetrator." Margaret's expression softened with genuine concern. "Harry, Linda's a registered nurse with an impeccable professional reputation. When this story becomes public, she'll be seen as another one of Derek's victims, not as his accomplice. If anything, her colleagues will rally around her as someone who was manipulated by a skilled predator." As Margaret prepared to leave, she handed me a sealed envelope containing copies of all the evidence she had gathered. "Harry, by tomorrow morning, Derek Thompson's career will be finished. His clients will have terminated their contracts, his employer will have fired him for violating professional ethics codes, and his reputation in the business community will be permanently destroyed." I held the envelope in my hands, feeling the weight of Derek's impending destruction. "Do you think this is too harsh? Maybe I should give him a chance to confess and make amends." Margaret studied my face with the same intensity she had once used to evaluate difficult hospital personnel decisions. "Harriet, this man spent months planning to steal your independence, your autonomy, and your life savings. He manipulated your daughter into supporting his scheme and attempted to have you declared mentally incompetent based on fabricated evidence."
This isn't about revenge. This is about justice. After Margaret left, I spent the morning in my workshop, tinkering with old projects and thinking about the conversation Derek and I would have when he returned home this evening. He would walk through my door expecting to celebrate his successful meeting with Cascade Financial, only to discover that his entire professional world had collapsed. I thought about Rose,
and what she would have wanted me to do in this situation. She had always believed in giving people opportunities to redeem themselves, but she had also possessed an iron core of justice when it came to protecting family and principles. Derek had crossed lines that even Rose's compassionate nature wouldn't have forgiven. At exactly 4:15, my phone rang. Margaret's name appeared on the screen, and I answered to hear barely controlled satisfaction in her voice. "Harry, it's over," she said simply. Derek lasted approximately 15 minutes in the meeting before Cascade senior partners asked him to leave their offices. They terminated his marketing contract effective immediately and are considering filing a formal complaint with the state attorney general's office. How did he react? According to my contact, Derek went through denial, anger, and panic in rapid succession. He tried to claim the evidence was fabricated, then attempted to blame you for manipulating the situation, and finally begged for a chance to explain himself. None of it worked. Margaret paused, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. Thompson and Associates received copies of all the documentation 30 minutes ago. Derek's employment was terminated before he could return to his office. Security escorted him from the building, and his access to company accounts has been revoked. I looked out my kitchen window at the driveway, where Derek's expensive car would soon arrive, carrying a man whose life had just been systematically destroyed by his own documented confession of fraudulent intent. Margaret, thank you for everything you've done. I couldn't have accomplished this without your help. Harry, it was my pleasure. Derek Thompson made the mistake of targeting someone with friends who understand how to fight back effectively. He should have chosen his victims more carefully. As evening approached, I sat in my living room with the evidence of Derek's conspiracy spread across my coffee table, waiting for the sound of his car in my driveway. Tonight, Derek would learn that Harold Mitchell was not the helpless elderly target he had imagined, and that some predators become prey when they underestimate their intended victims. Derek's car pulled into the driveway at 6:47. 23 minutes later than his usual arrival time. Through my living room window, I watched him sit motionless behind the wheel for several minutes, his silhouette slumped forward as if the weight of the day had physically crushed him. When he finally emerged, his expensive suit was wrinkled, his tie loosened, and his leather briefcase hung from his hand like a dead weight. I remained seated in my recliner as Derek's key turned in the front door. His footsteps crossed the entryway with none of their usual confident rhythm, and when he appeared in the living room doorway, I saw a man who had aged a decade in a single afternoon. "Hello, Derek," I said calmly, gesturing to the chair across from me. "How was your meeting at Cascade Financial?" Derek's face cycled through several expressions before settling on barely controlled rage. He didn't sit down, instead standing in the middle of my living room like a defendant awaiting judgment. "You did this," he said, his voice hoarse from what I imagined had been hours of desperate phone calls trying to salvage his career. "You and that Sullivan woman destroyed everything I've worked for." "I didn't destroy anything, Derek. You documented your own destruction when you put your conspiracy in writing." I picked up the printed email from my coffee table and held it up for him to see. "You planned to defraud me, and you were foolish enough to create evidence of your criminal intent." Derek's composure finally cracked completely. "Criminal intent? I was trying to help you. You're 75 years old, living alone in a house that's too big for you, clearly struggling with memory issues. According to Dr. Wells, my cognitive function is perfect. You knew that, Derek, because you were in the waiting room when I received those test results. Yet you chose to ignore medical evidence in favor of your fabricated narrative." The accusation hit home, and Derek's face flushed red with a mixture of anger and shame. "Fine, maybe I exaggerated some concerns, but I genuinely believed you needed help managing your affairs." I laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Derek, you've been scanning my personal documents, building files on my financial assets, and consulting with guardianship attorneys about gaining control of my estate. That's not concern for my well-being. That's calculated theft. Derek began pacing between the coffee table and the window, his movements erratic and desperate. "You have no idea what you've done. Cascade Financial was my biggest client. Thompson and Associates fired me without severance, without references. I'll never work in marketing again. Not in this region." "You're right," I agreed. "Your career in marketing is finished. Companies that serve elderly clients don't employ people who attempt to defraud senior citizens. Your own professional writings about elder advocacy will make it impossible for you to find work in this field anywhere." Derek stopped pacing and stared at me with genuine hatred. "You vindictive old man. You could have just talked to me, worked out some arrangement that protected everyone's interests. Instead, you chose to ruin my life. I tried to talk to you, Derek. Remember? You responded by publicly humiliating me at my own birthday party, claiming I had dementia in front of my friends and family." I stood up slowly, feeling every one of my 75 years, but also feeling stronger than I had in months. "You chose warfare over conversation. You just lost." The front door opened, and Linda's voice called out from the entryway. "Derek, Dad, I saw your car in the driveway." She appeared in the living room and immediately sensed the tension between us. "What's going on?" Derek turned to his wife with desperation written across his face. "Linda, your father has destroyed my career. He fed lies to my clients and got me fired from Thompson and Associates. He's ruined everything we've worked for." Linda looked between us, then noticed the documents spread across my coffee table. She picked up Derek's email correspondence with the guardianship attorney and read it again, her expression hardening with each word. "Derek, these aren't lies," she said quietly. "This is your own writing, describing how you planned to have my father declared incompetent so you could control his money. That was just a consultation. I was exploring options to protect Harry's interests when he became unable to manage his own affairs." Linda's voice rose with anger. "His medical evaluation showed perfect cognitive function. You knew that, and you chose to ignore it. You've been living in his house, eating his food, and planning to steal his independence." Derek's desperation reached new heights as he realized his wife was not going to support his version of events. "Linda, you said yourself that you were concerned about his memory. You agreed that he might need help managing his finances. Because you manipulated me into believing something that wasn't true." Linda's voice cracked with emotion. "You used my love for my father against both of us. You made me question his confidence so I would support your scheme." Derek turned back to me, his professional facade completely abandoned. "Harry, we can still work this out. I'll leave town, start over somewhere else. Just call your friends and tell them this was all a misunderstanding." "Derek, even if I wanted to help you, which I don't, the damage is irreversible. The State Attorney General's office is investigating you for elder fraud. Dr. Wells filed mandatory abuse reports. The Business Review is preparing an expose about your professional hypocrisy." I walked to the front door and opened it. "Your career isn't just damaged, it's obliterated." Derek followed me to the entryway, his voice taking on a pleading tone that made him sound like a frightened child. "Please, Harry, I made mistakes, but I don't deserve to have my entire life destroyed. I have student loans, a car payment, credit card debt. Without my income, I'll lose everything. You should have considered those consequences before you decided to target a 75-year-old man for financial exploitation." I held the door open wider. "You have 1 hour to pack your belongings and leave my house." Linda stepped forward, her face pale but determined. "Derek, I'll help you pack. Then I think we need to discuss whether this marriage can survive what you've done." Derek stared at his wife in shock. "Linda, you can't be serious. We're married. We're supposed to support each other through difficult times." "Marriage is supposed to be built on honesty and respect," Linda replied. "You've shown neither to me or my father. I need time to figure out if I can trust you again." As Derek climbed the stairs to gather his belongings, I sat back down in my recliner and looked around my living room. For the first time in months, my house felt like home again. The furniture was back where Rose and I had originally placed it, my personal documents were secure, and most importantly,
My autonomy and dignity were intact. Linda joined me on the couch, tears streaming down her face. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I should have seen through his manipulation. I should have trusted you instead of believing his lies about your mental state." I reached over and took her hand. "Linda, Derek is very skilled at manipulation. He built his career on understanding how to influence people's perceptions and decisions. You were his victim just as much as I was." Through the ceiling, we could hear Derek moving around upstairs, drawers slamming and hangers rattling as he hastily packed his belongings, the sounds of someone whose carefully constructed life was falling apart in real time. "What happens now?" Linda asked. "Now you decide whether you want to rebuild your marriage with someone who's capable of this level of deception, or whether you want to start fresh without him." I squeezed her hand gently. "Either way, you'll always have a home here with me." Derek appeared at the bottom of the stairs 30 minutes later, carrying 2 suitcases and a cardboard box containing his personal items. He paused in the living room doorway, looking at Linda with desperate hope. "I'll be staying at the Hampton Inn while I figure out my next steps. Linda, please think about everything we've built together before you make any permanent decisions." Linda looked at her husband with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Derek, what we built was based on lies and manipulation. I need time to figure out if there's anything real left to salvage." After Derek left, Linda and I sat in comfortable silence as the evening light faded outside my windows. The house felt peaceful for the first time since Derek had moved in, like a weight had been lifted from its foundation. "You know," Linda said eventually, "Mom would have been proud of how you handled this." I smiled, thinking about Rose and what she would have said about Derek's downfall. "Your mother always believed that people who choose to hurt others eventually face consequences for their actions. She just would have preferred that justice come with a side of mercy."
Did Derek deserve mercy? I considered the question carefully. Derek made his choices, Linda. He chose to see me as a target rather than family. He chose deception over honesty, theft over integrity. The consequences he's facing are the direct result of his own documented actions. As we prepared for bed, I realized that Harold Mitchell had learned something important about standing up for himself. Sometimes the most powerful response to cruelty isn't anger or revenge, but simply ensuring that bad behavior faces appropriate consequences. Derek Thompson had discovered that some elderly targets have teeth, and that predators sometimes become prey when they choose their victims poorly.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.